Hello, this is Gladstone 51. It was at this moment that Mr. Girard came forward. Unobserved by his companions, he had removed his coat and waistcoat and now showed himself in his purple braces and gray shirt. He did not even look at the woman's face. To the astonishment of the others, he stretched himself out flatly by her side upon the bed, using the little table as a support for one of his great elbows. Matt Decker could not help noticing that the bulge of his stomach had burst the top button of his trousers. For from this position he rolled his eyes towards the nurse. "Put summat under my head, will ye kindly?" he muttered, relapsing into the broadest Somerset. I guess Cockney is Somerset. Or Somerset is Cockney in this book. The nurse promptly obeyed him, snatching a faded cushion from a chair on the further side of the attic. "Take a thick lamp away, one of ye, if ye don't mind. No, put the little bugger on floor, missus, where it won't shine in our poor eyes." The A in won't has an umlaut over it, so I have no idea how to pronounce that, but... No. Again, the astonished nurse obeyed the singular authority, placing the lamp in the center of the floor and turning the wick down as low as she dared. "Now, Titty, old girl, thee and me be a-goin' to have some blessed sleep. I be drowsy as a spent bullock, I be. Not to ye both, not night to ye all. Titty and me be all right. Us'll be safe and sound till mornin', and then maybe ye'll bring me a cup o' tea, for we bless the Lordin." With the lamp placed where it was, it had become impossible now for either Mr. Decker or Miss Robinson to see anything but two blurred human faces laid side by side. "Are we really to leave you like this, Mr. Girard?" inquired Matt Decker. Not a sound, not a movement came from the bed. The priest picked up Mr. Girard's overcoat and his other clothes from where the man had left them fall on the floor. These objects he carefully stretched out over Bloody Johnny's prostrate form. "Come, Nancy," he muttered. "For God's sakes, let's do exactly what he says. I really think that, by the mercy of God, he's done what I couldn't do. And perhaps," here he sighed deeply, "what no doctor could do. Come, Nancy. Better leave them just as they are." He led the way down the narrow stairs, and Nurse Robinson followed after him. The nurse looked at a dilapidated armchair covered with a big red shawl full of holes which stood by one of the Gothic windows. Matt Decker lifted up the sooty kettle and peered into the stove. "Wait a second, Nancy," he said. He opened the back door of the wretched room, from the rafters and walls of which the damp of centuries seemed to emanate. A draught of chilly midnight air entered and made the little lamp flicker and the shadow of Nurse Robinson move portentously across the yellow strips of torn wallpaper that hung from the opposite wall. He returned in a minute, carrying a bundle of small pieces of wood pressed against his black waistcoat. Then he piled up the side of the stove, and then threw into the aperture the most suspicious-looking of the pieces. "Well, I'll be getting home, Nance," he said. "You'll be all right, won't he?" He moved up to a small cupboard and shamelessly opened it. "Yes, you're up to some tea and some biscuits, I see. Have you got anything to read?" He looked round, but could not see anything except Titty Petherson's great family Bible. Being the man he was, that particular work seemed to be in some way inadequate for a night-long vigil. He searched his great overcoat pockets, giving a grunt of satisfaction, extracted from one of them a small copy of White's Selborne. This he presented to the watcher with many nods and smiles. "'Twill help be awake or send him to sleep, Nance, just as he do have a mind." Like Girard of Glastonbury, Mr. Decker was always ready to revert at a pinch to the West County turns of speech. In sheer physical relief at escaping from the strain of Titty Pepperhorn's suffering, the good man now rubbed his big hands together and chuckled benevolently. For the last quarter of an hour he had forgotten White Lake Cottage. Thus, in the huge compensatory ebb and flow of great creative nature, one tension of human feeling has the power of ejecting or completely canceling another strain of feeling. For the emotional tension of a frustrated passion, there is no better cure than to spend an hour or two in the presence of terribly bodily anguish. Do you think that's true? Matt Decker was not an idealist, but he was a man of a proud and stormy heart, and what he had seen tonight had been the famous Aristotelian effect upon him. As he walked rapidly home, however, down George Street and High Street and Silver Street, this catharsis relaxed its comic force. By the time he reached the gate of his vicarage, poor Titty and her hysterical hypnotist were forgotten. He found his heart beating, his pulses throbbing to the old fatal tune. Had Sam come back? He strode up to the winding driveway and burst into the hall of his house. "Penny!" he shouted. "Penny!" The old servant came grumbling and blinking out of her kitchen, where she had been asleep in her chair. "Has Sam come home?" he inquired sternly. "Not that I know of, master," the woman answered. "Not unless he crept upstairs in his stocking feet." That's German now. Last time I think it was it Jamaican I was doing? I don't know. Matt Decker ran upstairs just as he was, too perturbed in mind to take off either his hat or his coat. He flung open the door of Sam's bedroom. Empty it was, with the indescribable look of desolation that bedrooms of the absent and of the dead so quickly assume. And Sam's father stood for a second on the dimly lit landing, chewing the bitter cud of remedialist loss. Then he went slowly to his own bedroom, and having telephoned to the Geards' house to tell them what had become of their man, he undressed and sought his pillow. But the priest's rest that night was feverish and disturbed, nor was its vicar the only troubled sleeper in Glastonbury. Under many of its roofs, from the brick tilings of the town council's house in Benedict Street to the slate roofs of the tradesmen villas in Wells Street, outrage and wounded hearts kept human souls awake. Perhaps in one house alone there was absolute peace, in one house alone a deep and liquid rest, forgetful of all ill, and that was the house in which Bloody Johnny and Titty Petherton slept on the same bed. So that was the end of chapter Gird of Glastonbury. Now we're on to the next chapter. None of them are numbered, so I don't know what chapter number it is. Consummation. When Sam Decker reached Whitlake Cottage that day, it was nearly 4 o'clock. He had remained standing motionless once or twice during his rapid walk. Standing in that fixed position, and in that same abstracted trance into which it had recorded that the philosophic Socrates fell at certain crisis in his life. And he had no idea how long these moments of abstraction had lasted. Once at the place, however, he knocked resolutely at the door. There was a sound inside which made him think that the young mistress of the house was upstairs cleaning the floor. And when the girl came running down to let him in, the supposition proved the correct one, for she was garbed in a long green linen overall, covering the whole of her dress. Sam! Oh, Sam! She was in his arms in a moment, and for a brief space of time the simple, unadulterated craving for each other's presence, satisfied now so deeply, drowned every other consideration. "Sit down, Sam. Oh, my dear! Oh, my dear!" And she pulled with violent tugs at her linen overall till she had got it over her head. She tossed the thing down on the sofa first, and then, to make room for them to sit down side by side on that piece of furniture, she quickly folded up the garment and flung it across the back of a chair. They sat side by side now, his hands clasping hers, too happy simply to be together, to do anything but drink of each other's identity. "I thought this morning," she murmured, "Sam may come today, but I never thought you really would." "Oh, Nellie, my little Nellie." He lifted up his hands and, pushing back her hair from her forehead, drew her face towards him. The girl's lips parted under his passionate kiss, and when he let her go, her head dropped forward like a flower whose stem had been broken. Not a flicker, not a ripple of shame, not a shallow of the least awareness of any change in his recent mood swept across his consciousness when he kissed Nell Zoyland like that. It must be remembered that Sam's idea of what he meant to struggle to life, the life of a saint, was a very different thing from any notion that his father would have entertained had Matt Decker aimed at such a state. Not that it would be any easier to be a saint in Sam's way than to be a saint in his father's way. In some respects, it would be more difficult. For one thing, it would require a causatory more shape-edged, more sharp-edged, more flexible, more searching, and not less exacting. Sam's whole attitude towards his feelings as he sat on Nell's sofa turned on the point, though he did not analyze it, as to whether this ecstasy he got from the girl was just sensuality or something quite different from sensuality. Without analyzing his feelings, he knew in his heart that it was very different. And this knowledge, penetrating his whole being, saved him from many pricks of consciousness. In his analytical way, Sam was now blinded by passion as he breathed in and breathed out the paradisiac air of her presence, as not to be vaguely conscious of his delicious surprise. It was a surprise to him to find that he was not torn by any moral conflict. He had pushed back the thought of such a conflict to the furthest margin of his mind, but somewhere in his spirit he had been expecting it, and now it had not come. There was no conflict. His thrilling happiness with Nell, since the girl was as she was, brought him nothing but a great flooding wave of absolute peace. The trouble between them had risen from Nell's nature then, not from his. It was the woman, not the man, whose consciousness had been torn. Well, if Nell felt no shame now, if Nell felt no division in her heart, all was well. The personality of Will Zoyland on the moral horizon of Sam's life was no more to him than the willows and poplars of Queen Sedgemoor on its physical horizon. As far as the girl herself, her recent decision in Zoyland's favor and her return to his bed had been all along of a very special and peculiar nature. The girl's real unconscious motive in this action, an action whose immediate repercussion upon herself had produced that terrible turmoil of malaise which had seized upon her in St. John's Church, had been revenge upon Sam for not taking a bold, drastic, and final step in their relations, in other words, for not carrying her off. It is woman's fatal susceptibility to passionate touch that hypnosis them by far the greater number of their disasters. Okay. For under this touch hypnosis, the present transforms itself into the eternal, and their grand sex defense, their consciousness of continuity, their awareness of the future as an integral portion of the present, is shattered and broken up. The ideal love affairs for women are when it is easy for them, after those momentary plunges into the eternal, to fall back upon, again, their realistic sense of continuity. Whereas the ideal love affairs... got some indigestion, sorry. Whereas the ideal love affairs for men are when their feeling for novelty and for adventure is perpetually being re-aroused by the debilitating variability of women's moods. "I've been thinking of you all the while, Sam," she said now, as Sam leant over her, clutching one of her hands with both his and pressing it deeply into the fold of her lap. "The other day, was it the day before yesterday? Yes, I think so. But I want to seem to have lost all sense of time. I started replanting some wild flowers out there in the bank. Meadow orchids they were. And suddenly I couldn't bear it not seeing you, and I came running in, and I fell on the sofa and cried and cried. It was the very sofa," she went on, in a changed voice, and what was evidently a swift, sudden vision of the vagaries of time, "where we're now sitting. Oh, my dear, I never thought it would all come true." And we'll leave it for today at that. So leave your comments in the below. Do you think what's his name again? Powys has it right about women wanting I don't know. What did he say? Passionate touch. They fall under the hypnosis of passionate touch, and their ideal love affairs are when it's easy for them after these momentary plunges into the eternal to fall back again upon the realistic sense of continuity, whereas men prefer the novelty of the adventurous and perpetually being re-aroused. Do you buy in that? If so, leave your comments below, or if not, you can argue them there too. Until next time, I hope everything that you would want all comes true. I'll see you in Glastonbury. Cheers.